Good evening. Calling school committee to order, Tuesday, March 12th, 6:31 PM. I'm going to turn it first. We have the statement regarding Zoom recording, please.
Good evening. This meeting will be recorded and will be posted to YouTube and other social media platforms. By participating in this meeting, you understand that the recording could contain your video stream or your audio stream, including images of yourself or anyone in the room with you. If you choose to enable your video or audio device during the meeting, as well as anything or anyone else that may be in the background, could be recorded. The recording could include any opinions you contribute and anything you say about yourself. On occasion, chat within the meeting could also be captured in the meeting recording. Therefore, anyone attending the recorded meeting may have aspects of their personal data recorded if they actively participate or not.
Thank you. Roll call.
Dr. Allen? He won't be attending tonight. Mr. Marsh?
Here.
Mr. Deschamps?
Here.
Mr. Willannon?
Here.
Ms. Kelly?
Here.
Ms. Garvey? Ms. Cartier?
Here.
Ms. Chamberlain?
Here.
Ms. Muck? Here. Mr. Wiggler?
Here.
Ms. Thompson?
Here.
Mr. Nutter?
Here.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Here.
Mr. Whitelaw?
Yeah.
And Ms. Coviello, I don't think is joining us tonight.
And before I turn it over to the budget subcommittee, over to Mr. Wiggler, just wanted to, for the committee, to welcome our newest member, Alicia Muck, from Hubbardston. So welcome. You came in right at the busiest time of times. And again, welcome. Anything you'd like to say now? There's no pressure, no nothing if you don't want to.
I'm excited for this opportunity to join the school committee, especially to help, all the kids as well. I have two daughters that are in the system as well, so.
Again, welcome. Thank you. And we'll work together and turn it over to Mark.
Good evening. Just a couple comments I'd like to make before we actually move to a motion and the public hearing. We met 3 times so far this year on budget subcommittee, and each time there was a reduction in the prior number. What we're really looking at is Ms. Cheryl at the last meeting proposed for the budget iteration number 3 changes, which included reductions of $796,717. Preliminary budget number 1, which is where we started on our first, when we kicked this off, started at $41,525,586, which represented almost an 8% increase, 7.9% increase. Obviously, we knew that needed to be reworked. Proposed budget number 2 was reduced to $40,858,614, which represented a 6.17% increase. Even at that particular point, we knew when we looked at the numbers on the assessments that we needed to do some additional reductions. The administration met, the cost center managers, principals met, and decided what areas could be reduced without severely impacting the quality of education which we provide for our students. Proposed budget number 3 was reduced to $40,061,897, which represented a 4.1% increase over the FY24 budget. Total cuts to date amount to $1,463,689. Using this figure, total operating assessments to the member communities will be, or currently are under the existing recommendation, Berry 8.07%, Hardwick 6.84%, Hubbardston 11.98%, New Braintree 2.58%, and Ocam 5.58%. So as you can see, and Cheryl will explain during the presentation, the assessments are really from a low of 2.58 to a high of 11.98. The subcommittee voted to approve this and send it to the full committee which we're going to vote on tonight prior to the opening of the public hearing. I have a motion which I'm going to move. I move to adopt an FY '25 budget in the amount of $40,061,897 to be presented at the public hearing to follow, as required by Mass General Laws, Chapter 71, Section 16B. Projected revenue sources include $16,996,468 in Chapter 78, $1,150,704 in regional transportation reimbursement, $960,942 in district revenues and reserves, including $750,000 from excess and development and deficiency, E&D, to offset member town assessments, that's $750,000, and $10,000 from excess and deficiency, E&D, for a contribution to the OPEB trust fund. In addition to these projected revenues, this budget requires the use of the technology stabilization account in the amount of $147,174. I'll entertain a second.
Second.
Discussion?
Cheryl, how much will that leave in E and D by using that amount, do you know?
We have $1,575,901 in certified E&Ds, which is just less than that.
Other questions? Anybody online?
No one's raised their hand.
Ready to vote?
Ready to vote? Roll call, please.
Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Mr. Deschamps?
Yes.
Mr. Willannon?
Yes.
Ms. Kelly?
Abstain?
Ms. Cartier?
Yes.
Ms. Chamberlain?
Yes.
Ms. Muck?
Yes.
Mr. Wiggler?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Nutter?
Yes.
Chairman Brophy?
Yes. Okay,
Good. Motion passed.
2/3. Yep.
2/3, okay.
At this particular point, I'm going to turn this over to Superintendent for any opening remarks, and then we'll move to Cheryl for the full presentation.
Sure, thank you. So if you've been following along with us, you'll know that this is going to be a challenging year, and I know that people hear that year after year. What I hope that you will walk away with tonight is a deeper understanding of our reality. And I certainly want to thank Cheryl for her presentation, but I also want to front load it with, when she was putting her presentation together tonight, we wanted to recognize and acknowledge that we had many new members here, both on our town boards and on our own board. And so she's going to go a little bit deeper than she has in the past when we've kind of had the same standing committee. So if you have any questions along the way, please do not hesitate to ask, write them down, and we'll have lots of time for discussion. But again, I hope you can see that we are trying really hard to prioritize and focus on our students, and have a budget that we can sustain. And, we are really worried about next year and the following year. So I just want to say that, and Cheryl will kick us off.
Thank you. This is going to put the presentation on board. It's actually going to fit for me today. As Colleen mentioned, I decided when I was putting this presentation together to go back to a format that I stopped using for the FY18 budget in 2017. But you've been on the committee since then, I apologize. But I think it was important for new people to understand who we are, what we do, as well as the town boards that are new to a public hearing that we have. So it's a little longer than it has been in the recent past, but I hope you feel that it is worthwhile. The going to start with what is Quabbin Regional School District? Just go really quickly through these guys. So we are 5 communities and 170 square miles. It is 7 school buildings and 1 administrative building. This year we are 2,191 students coming from 30 different communities. And as of the last payroll, we had 405.5 FTEs. We have a lot of employees that are part-time. So we always talk about FTEs, which are full-time equivalents. And I have a chart here by our categories that we covered. And then when we're talking about staffing patterns and each of the locations that we have. We are 435 square feet of building space and 26.08% acres just on this campus. We use 23 buses and 26 vans to get our kids to school. And the district is governed by a 15-member school committee. We are a $51.5 million educational organization. To the principles that guide us when we put the budget together. These are our priorities when we are building our budget for the following year. We want to reflect the priorities of the school committee. Make sure that it's aligned with the district's mission, vision, core values, and strategic plan, as well as the district and individual school improvement plans. We try to provide sustainability in meeting or exceeding those district goals. We take into consideration our declining enrollment as well as declining revenue sources. We try to be proactive rather than reactive, and we try to communicate to all stakeholders. Thank you to the 4 of you that are here tonight. Our strategic plan falls into the strategic objectives of the district, and then into the budget, because the budget is the fiscal year spending plan by which to advance or attain completion of the district's strategic objectives. I have provided for you, I'm not going to read to you, but provide for you the strategic plan for 2023 through 2026. So that actually began this year. I have our vision and our mission statement here. Next. I have our theory of action, our core values, and our strategic objectives. Our objective of the budget is to make the best use of all of our resources, which are people, time, space, and money, in order to achieve our objectives. The critical factors to successful implementation of strategic plan and goals is budgeting and making sure that we try to budget at a strategic level, not only an operational level. We try to look forward, not just in the immediate future. Our strategic goals are supported by our budget and budgeting process, and we want to make sure that we have sufficient resources and they are funded and allocated appropriately. As the superintendent said, we were looking at significant challenges in building the FY25 budget. For you, those of you that were here just 3 short years ago, when we had a slight increase in enrollment and we got money from the Student Opportunity Act that helped to reduce our hold harmless debt, Superintendent Dr. Muir and I, we thought for sure we'd be out of hold harmless debt by the end of 2025. Guess what? The following 2 years just put us deeper and deeper in debt. So we're not where we had hoped to be for building this budget. The first significant challenge is declining state aid. We're actually losing $93,000 from what we built last year's budget on. 68% of the districts in the Commonwealth are receiving only minimum aid of $30 per student in the governor's budget. That's very difficult to work with. It's $57,000 for us. 64% of regional school districts are in hold harmless debt, which means they get no impact of the Student Opportunity Act, which will now be in year 4, because we're paying off that debt that we got into from declining enrollment going back to FY05. It's also the end of the ESSER 3 grant, which was Pandemic Relief Grant Program. That was the largest amount of money that we got from the federal government. And it was time to make decisions as to whether we are going to reduce or eliminate some of the programs that were put into place directly after COVID and then 2 years later. Currently this year, we use $880,000 in the operating budget to address academic, social, emotional needs of students. And we still have those same concerns. We still have those same needs, but that money is going away. We have declining reserves. In order to make this budget work, we are digging deeper into our school choice reserve than we've ever had to do. Right now, we're seeing, and as everybody is seeing, historic inflation costs on everything we buy. I think we have a story about baseballs, right? How much baseballs were?
I said it's easy for us to think of the cost of gas and groceries and things like that, but I was reviewing the budget with the athletic director, and he told me, just as one example, that baseballs have doubled in price, a case of baseballs. It's crazy.
And we're seeing those increases all across our supplies and our materials, and even in contracted services, when we need to go to a collaborative to get speech or OT or PT services for our students, we're seeing increases there as well. We got an 18% increase on our bus contract for the next 3 years. And we're entering into a new electricity contract for November of 2024. And we have building infrastructure needs. We'd like to think that we have new buildings. They look wonderful, but they're not new buildings. The one we're concerned about right now is the air circulation improvement in the middle high school. We do have some key district priorities that we built this budget on. One is academic support. Actually, Colleen, I'll go through them quickly, but if you could talk about them.
Of course. So you've probably read in the newspapers about chronic absenteeism. This has been a challenge across the nation, not just here at Quabbin. But we are working really hard to address our chronic absenteeism and improve our attendance. We're working to provide opportunities for credit recovery and summer programming. That was something we started last year, and we know we have a need to continue this year. The needs of our learners are much more diverse. We have more multilingual learners than we've had in the past. We also have new mandates around screening for dyslexia and addressing the needs of our readers, especially at the early literacy level. We have a new IEP process that is being mandated that we have to implement this year as well. And our speech services have gone up significantly for our students. We're continuing to provide social emotional supports and outreach. You'll remember from ESSER funding in the pandemic that we put into place additional social workers, behavioral specialists. We also ended our partnership with New England Center for Children, and we took over our own autism classrooms. We're continuing to work on that. And we've had a report, a safety and security report that we'll talk a little bit about on Thursday. But we also, in this time and age, really pay attention to keeping our buildings safe, secure, clean, healthy. We have been piloting some of the recommendations from that report, such as a sign-in, sign-out process. And we know that what is most important to student learning is having a welcoming and inclusive school culture and environment where our kids feel like they belong and that they can thrive. So that is a high priority for us.
So we're going to look at enrollment as we go further through this presentation. First, we're going to define enrollment, because when people talk about student enrollment, there's actually 3 types of enrollment we have. We have resident enrollment. Those are students that are enrolled in the district who live in one of our 5-member communities. And also if they're temporarily living in another community for the period of time. Then there is school enrollment. School enrollment are students that are in our seats, students in seats. So our resident enrollment plus school choice students plus tuition in students, of which we have none this year. And together we have district enrollment, who are all the kids that are sitting in the seats, plus our students that are in out-of-district placements and students that are receiving services only. We have none of those being reported this year, most likely because we expanded our pre-K program this year. And students who we are financially responsible, there are none recorded as that this year. In our resident enrollment, 2 screens, Jess, thank you. In resident enrollment, I provide for you a chart of the last 3 years. This is as of October 1, for those of you who don't know. The count on October 1 is the official count of the school district's enrollment. You'll see that from last year, we're down 27 students. Each town have less resident students in our schools as they did last year, except for Hubbardston. Hubbardston has an increase of 20 students. Over the past 3 years, we're down 52 students, but over the last 21 years, which is the number of years I've been keeping data, we're down over 1,000 students that are residents in our schools. And I provide for you just a graph that you can see starting to go up just a little bit, and then it went back down. 3 years ago, we were very happy. This is a graph of our actual enrollment and our projected enrollment as NESDEC, New England School Development Council, provides a demographic study for us each year. When the October 1 numbers are certified by DESE, we send those numbers. Just helps me by getting the numbers of our students that are in parochial schools or vocational schools, and we report this all to NESDEC, and then they do some demographic configurations for us, which we'll see later on in the slide. We also have residents who either choice out or charter out to other districts. So I provide for you a school choice out trend for the last 4 years. Enrollment in virtual academies that hit a high during the COVID times has significantly decreased from 3 years ago. However, the early numbers this year show more school choice out than last year. But I'll just remind you, at the final report for FY23, there was 63.14 FTEs, a student in school choice out. That's because they actually counted by daily enrollment. So if a student leaves Quabbin and goes to another district and comes back, or leaves that and goes somewhere else, they report it by the day. That number was over 70 when we started at October 1 last year, so more kids came back. And I provide for you, I know it's very small, but if you have the printed copy, maybe you can see, I just divide out where the kids are going, from what town, and what schools they're going to. Sometimes people are interested, where do our kids go and why? I can't tell you why, but I can tell you where they're going. And you'll see that FY21, which was our hybrid year, when we came back to school as soon as we could and everybody came back in a hybrid model, those were the highest school choice out. That was also the highest year for the virtual academies. For charter schools, I provide for you the last 5 years. You'll see that we actually are going down from charter schools. There was a big thing in 2020 where we had almost 23 kids in charter schools, but this year we only have 11. Here are the projections I talked about that NESDEC provided for us. What's interesting here is the green line, that's Hubbardston. The other towns are going to be relatively stable. This is a 10-year period that's shown here. They're relatively stable. Red line, which is New Braintree, is going down. The next two are going up a little bit. Well, look at Hubbardston. Hubbardston is overtaking Barry in kids pre-K to 12 over the next 10 years. NESDEC also provides these projections in the grade levels for us. So we have pre-K to 5 in our elementary schools. You can see again that Hubbardston has the greatest increase there, but everybody else is relatively stable over the 10-year period. Little up, little down, but relatively stable over the 10 years. Grades 6 through 12 is a little more action there in the towns. New Braintree really going down, while Hardwick and New Braintree are going up a little bit. But again, that green line with Hubbardston, where it's going to overtake the number of residents that are in our schools or are eligible to come to our schools at that point, than in Barry, which is very interesting to me, being here 23 years. Now we'll talk about school enrollment. I provide for you 3 years of school enrollment in our schools. From last year, we're down only 4, but being down only 4 kids puts you in greater hold harmless debt. Over 3 years, we're down 55 students, and over the same 21-year period, again, over 1,000 kids. You'll notice that was only a three kid difference between resident enrollments and school enrollment for 21 years, I'm sorry. Just a graph for those of you who are visual learners. I also provide, as information only, the number of students by grade in each one of our schools. I provide where our school choice kids are coming from. This year, we have 282 children enrolled as of October 1st from towns outside of our district towns. So as I said before, students from 30 different towns come to our district. I think that's amazing. Somebody's going to point out to me that there are 282 school choice students on this report, and yet, can you go to just, because that's just a graph? There's only 277 here. That's because there are 5 students that are choicing into Quabbin, but now they're in out-of-district placements. So right here, I'm telling you how many students from school choice are in with our students in our schools. sometimes we hear, why are we losing school choice students? We may be losing the number of school choice students. Could you go back one, Jess? You'll notice in FY08, that would have been the 2006-2007 school year, there were 429 students coming here under school choice. This year we're at 282. Yes, we have less students, but there are less school-age students everywhere around us, which I show in the next chart. School choice ranges between just under 12% to 13%. So we're relatively stable in the number of school choice kids we have in our school population. I'm going to go into the methods that we use when we put this budget together. We already mentioned that we had $880,000 of ESSER 3 funding positions this year. They were used strictly for salaries. There was an easy audit trail of where that money was being spent. In FY25, the challenge is to determine which programs will continue and how will we pay for them if we're going to continue. Those ESSER funds must be committed by September 30th of this year. It is our intention to spend all of that money by September 30th. In addition to the positions and the supplies that are currently using that funding, there's $101,000 remaining unencumbered at this point, which is going to be used for our summer school programming that Colleen spoke about a little bit earlier, our credit recovery programs in our summer school. I'm just going to go through a little bit of the expenses in the budget and why and how they get to be the numbers that they are. For our salaries, positions covered by a collective bargaining agreement, the STEP and COLA have been applied. We have contracts in place for next year for all of our 6 bargaining units. If we have open or requested positions in the budget, if they're a K-8 teaching position, it's budgeted at $64,609. And if it's a 9 through 12 teaching position, it's $70,228. If we have an outgoing teacher making X, I do not budget that amount of money for that teacher. I budget a certain limit to come in. And a number of years ago, the administrative team got together and decided what level we would try to stay within when we're hiring. And these are the levels for this year. Positions that are covered by individual contract or at-will positions, of which we have several, are budgeted at the same increase as the COLA and the collective bargaining agreements. I know this is small and I apologize. This is the list of positions in the first round of budget that were budgeted fully because they were either currently unfilled and we're hoping to still fill them this year, or because due to retirement, which I believe we have 10 employees retiring, either at the end of the school year or during the beginning of next school year. And we had 5 new positions that were requested. At that point in time, there were 20 new positions at an estimated cost of $1.1 million. You'll see in proposed 2, before we even came to the school committee, a principal had requested a special ed teacher. We immediately said, sorry, no, but we'll give you an intervention tutor, which is like half the cost. But by the proposed number 3 budget, that was cut as well. And you'll see the positions that we have cut so far in here. We have an open position of Director of Teaching and Learning. Joe Wyman left, I believe in July or maybe early August. We've not filled the position and we're cutting it for next year. There's a middle high school special education teacher cut at this point. A guidance counselor, open guidance counselor, which will make some changes internally. So that position's been cut. A kindergarten teacher is retiring and we will be making some changes due to class sizes to cover that position. School secretary is retiring and she currently is a 260-day employee at 8 hours a day. We're cutting that to a 193-day position, which is a 0.25 FTE cut. We're cutting a middle school teacher. Again, there's a retirement. We're going to fill it with something else. The special education teacher I mentioned, and a paraprofessional position was requested and we made that cut. So at this point in time, we're cutting 7.25 positions at this point. We do have some asset purchases and maintenance projects that were in the first round of the budget. One thing that's on everybody's mind is our athletic field press box and bleachers. We've been talking about this project for probably 4 years. About a couple of months ago, the school committee decided that the best action would be to get an engineer to say, oh, what should we do? What's the best alternative here? We did have a fundraising initiative that hasn't really gone too far since November, but right now there's currently $42,706 in that account. We estimate the project, this is old prices that we got, $350,000. Right now, there's an RFQ on the street that's due on the 27th of March, and we will hopefully get an engineering firm that will present to the school committee on different options that they may or may not decide to take. And if they do decide to move forward, their next step would be to discuss funding or financing options on that project. So that is not in the budget, that's just information right now. These are the building improvement and asset requests that were in the first round of budget. They total $363,556. We've decided to remove them from the budget, so they will not be part of the assessment to the towns. And these items, and I thought on the drive back in here, I shouldn't have worded it this way. All of these items and projects have been removed from the budget, but they may be funded with rural school aid. If you've been to other meetings, you've heard us talk about rural school aid. It's meant to help districts that are in rural schools, rural areas, and have declining enrollment. The fact is, though, we don't know how much we're going to get until usually October, and we have to spend it by June. So it can't be part of your budgeting for that particular year, but you have to spend it by June. So we have decided over the past 3 years to do projects at our middle high school or buy assets. So we will go through this line and determine which projects will or will not be done. And that hasn't been determined at this time. This is a new slide in my public hearing presentation, just because I heard some rumblings. Just want public to understand how capital costs are sent to our towns. There are 2 documents that define the financial responsibility of capital costs for the Quabbin Regional School District, as we are not a tax-raising entity. The regional agreement defines what capital costs are, and it refers to the lease agreements and what the excess limits are. So basically what it's saying is if there is a capital cost, a single repair or maintenance item that costs over $5,000 or more, it's a town responsibility to pay if it is in the town school, the elementary school, because the towns own the elementary school. If it's at the middle high school, that cost gets apportioned to the member towns based on the regional agreement formula. Just to point out, the regional agreement was redone in 2014. However, the leases were done nearly 25 years ago, so the language quite isn't lining up anymore, and that's something that the school committee is going to undertake. There are quite a few other funds that support the operations of the district. So here I have provided for you the fund name, the type of fund, whether it is a revolving account or a grant, the type of expenses that are typically charged to those funding sources. You'll see that for the FY25 budget, there will be 66.5 positions that are in these other sources, not in the general operating budget. And the total expected is $6.1 million. I provide for you the current balances, and when I say current, I mean as of the close of February. The balances in our revolving accounts are trust and our agency funds, by those funds. I also provide for you the balances in our grants. Grants are a little different than they have historically been. Historically, grants were for 1 year at a time. Now we have grants that roll for 3 years or roll for 5 years. So they're indicated there what the duration of the grant is. Now we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the budget. I don't know if you all have the budget documents in front of you, the line item reports. I just have a little graphic to help you understand how it's best to read our line item budget. The first line item budget is the most detail in our budget. It is this binder right here that comes out to 271 pages worth of detail. That is then highlighted. I believe it's in gray. And those totals go forward to an intermediary report that will finally get us to the appropriation control report, which is the one that the school committee votes on. The function subtotal report is then subtotaled by in goldenrod color and transferred to the appropriation control report, which is the one that the school committee votes on. It's also the document by which the school committee allows transfers between these categories. That's how you read the report. These are the line items. This is the appropriation control report that indicate where the 4.1% increase in budget is going. I provide here the current year's budget as it currently is, and where we were with proposed 1, 2, and 3, which is where we are now. So the current budget, proposed 3, is $1.56 million over last year, or a 4.1% increase. I'm going to go through each of the appropriation categories to give you an idea of what the costs are doing. In district administration, we're seeing a slight increase. We have applied the COLA percentages to all salaries. There's a reduction to the salary for the new school business administrator. There's a reduction in the actual cost from the district treasurer because last year we had an outgoing district treasurer team, but they were here for July and August to help the new treasurer come on board. And so there had a slight reduction in that for next year. The estimated indemnity insurance will need to be adjusted when our renewal for March comes in for this year, but we are projecting a 5% increase. In administrative technology, a slight increase of 2%, which are increases in software licenses. Those never seem to stop, increases in software license costs, and it's a replacement of 1 laptop. In instructional support, which is the bulk of the expenses of our budget, and it's our largest appropriation category, and it's really meant to be what goes in the schools. It's got a slight increase. Contracted salary increases are applied as well as lane changes for the collective bargaining agreement. We have a transfer of 1 CNA position to the health grant, so that's a reduction to budget, and we have a reduction in force. In addition to the positions that were in the first slide that said these were what was requested and where we are, we're also making some reductions in force. So people that are here working this year will not be working next year. We already talked about the Director of Teaching, Learning, and Support. We've also reduced the work year for our academic coaches and our intervention specialists. They were working either 7 or 10 days over the teacher contract, and they were paid for those days accordingly. They are all just working over 5 days. The superintendent can talk more about what 3 of those days are 3 days of professional development for new teachers to us. And if you want to say more about those.
Sure, and the additional days tend to involve data and planning for instruction. So they typically would spend time at the end of the year reviewing the data, making plan for the upcoming year, and then again prepping at the start of the year with that data. So they'll be down to 5 days.
3.5 teaching positions by attrition. So those are positions that won't be filled, but filled with internal people. Guidance counselor we talked about. 1 CNA, be a reduction in force. So currently now we have 2. One is going to be transferred to the health grant and one is will no longer be working here. 2.25 administrative support. I mentioned the 0.25 earlier, and this is 2 more positions. And a 0.5 communication specialist. I believe that was just put in about 2 years ago, maybe 3, and that's going away. In transportation services, I made a mistake. I did all of the math to take into consideration the new transportation contract, but I didn't enter it into budget. So next round, that'll be added in. But we did make a reduction to the auxiliary transportation for homeless and foster students. This year, we don't have as many as we had last year, so we see we'll have an excess this year, and we needed to take that into consideration when budgeting for next year. You never know what that's going to be, but we believe that we can safely make a reduction. No change in the school nutrition line. As I said before, in meetings, the governor's budget includes free meals for all students, but our advisors have told us it's not enough to cover that actual cost. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that as we move through the Commonwealth's budget process. In athletics and student activities, which I'm missing the name there, Jess. Will you post tomorrow? How many times I've looked at this is ridiculous. Changing that, so we'll just post it tomorrow, it'll be correct. 6.66%. That includes contracted salary increases that are in the collective bargaining agreement, as well as we are raising our cheerleading squad to a varsity level. There's costs involved with that. The increased costs of supplies we mentioned, replacement uniforms. Last year we bought our new uniforms out of the athletic revolving account. Our replacement uniforms need to go back into the budget. And there's a slight increase for actually hosting the wrestling tournament that we usually drive, I believe, to Vermont for, right? Or New Hampshire, Vermont for. So we'll be hosting it next year. School security, that's up 11%, but as you see, it's less than $20,000. That's the increase in the software licensing for our Alice training. And we also, this year, after the budget was done, we extended the day for our after-school security staff who currently work 20 hours a week because now they're here during activities that are in school at night, like the basketball games, the football games. They're online. I know that's a big thing for Mr. Brophy, that we have some kind of security on our grounds. In our area of buildings and grounds, we'll actually see a slight reduction. We did put in the contracted salary increase. There are some reductions due to someone retiring. One of our project engineers is retiring. There's an increased cost due to inflationary costs, as we talked about, increase in some field maintenance supplies, a reduction to playground mulch and field line paint. We cut ice melt out completely based on our current inventory. We got a much larger decrease in costs if we bought more this year, so we did that. And we are removing all buildings, ground equipment, building maintenance projects, and furniture, as we talked about. And just a note for those who don't know, by DESE reporting requirements, all classroom furniture and non-technology equipment is reported in the function category 4230, which in our appropriation control report is under buildings and grounds. So it doesn't matter what kind of equipment or furniture is, that's where it's budgeted. In technology infrastructure is going up. We have the estimated COLA for our staff in that department. The largest cost is the telephone license renewal and upgrade of $5,232 per location. And this increase is actually lower than it would be because it includes the transferring of costs of the Chromebook and laptop refresh cycle to the state technology stabilization account, which was voted earlier this evening. Our benefits are going up by just over 9%. However, they're not true and active because we do not yet have the Worcester Regional Retirement Assessment. We have estimated benefits for 10 retiring employees, but those numbers will change over time. We have our increase in health insurance for next year, for next January, but it will go up in August. So I put in a 4.7% increase on that and increased number of enrollees based on our open enrollment of this year. And we do not yet have the retired teachers' health insurance in this budget. So those are really estimated soft costs at this point. And fixed charges, which really is only for us, are business insurances. As I mentioned earlier, we don't know the cost of FY24 yet. I'll know this later this week, and I will rebuild what I believe we should budget for FY25 based on our renewal costs of this year. In tuitions, we have a slight increase, and that is based on the school choice sending report and the Sims data report and the cherry sheet that was issued with the governor's budget. And there was a reduction to charter tuition costs based on the cherry sheet as well. In special education categories, a slight reduction in legal services based on this year's usage, slight reduction in administrative technology. We have there's very specific software for some special ed students that need it, and we don't need one of them next year, so that's a slight reduction there. In instructional support, again, the largest category in our special ed area, contracted salary increases, estimated COLA for non-union personnel, a reduction in force of one academic support person and one special ed teacher. But we do have requested positions here. And we have, for the first time in our school district, since I've been here anyway, 23 years, we hired an occupational therapist and a physical therapist this year. There is a need for another. And there's a need for another 182-day paraprofessional. If anyone has any questions on that, John Salavardos is here, our special ed director, and he could answer why we need those positions. You all set with that?
Are they shared over the whole district?
Yes. Part of the cost. It's when you need to have someone split over 5 different locations, it reduces their workday. Transportation services, we have an active contract for transportation services, so this is the contracted year 2 increase. Tuition, we have a couple students that are in transition right as we speak. We don't know until they go through the IEP process in May whether they will be out of district next year or not. So right now we're just hedging our bets and putting it in there. We may make some adjustments as we go through. Debt is actual. It's a decrease in the middle high school green repair project, but 3 of our towns decided they were going to borrow for our chiller project. So there's a slight increase there based on those 3 that decided to borrow. Our next steps in the budget would be to adjust the costs. As you know, we adjust this budget until right up till we can go to town meeting. We will adjust costs as they are known. I'll add the transportation increase in there, Worcester Regional Retirement, retired teachers' health insurance, the business insurances, and electricity contract. I should know the electricity contract in about a month. At this point, I'd like to shift gears and review some DESE financial data to see how Quabbin's spending compares to the state average. This is the per pupil expenditure report for FY23, the latest data on file. And I have it by categories, the categories by which the DESE reports our data. They don't match up category by category to ours, but they are very close. You'll see that in bold, the in-district per pupil expenditure, Quabbin's per pupil spending in FY23 was $18,947 as compared to the state average of $20,006, or $1,059 less per student by the state average. The state, as I put in my note, the DESE does not calculate a per pupil expenditure or state average for out-of-district expenditures because there is no consistent formula to calculate this number over all the function categories. For example, we do not collect the data, nor does the state, of how much of Dr. Salavero's time in out-of-district placements is as compared to his in-district students. They don't collect the data, so they don't provide this data. However, the number that I have there is what our out-of-district costs are, which are the tuitions and transportation only, divided by the number of students we have in out-of-district placements, special education placements. So it's $29,000 per student. So the district is spending $1,119,000 less than the state average. And I think Colleen wants to make a few statements about that.
Well, I think it's important to just highlight that state average is exactly that. It's state average, right? So it's the Springfields and the Wellesleys and so on and so forth. And so the fact that we're spending less than 50% of the school districts across Massachusetts, I think is something to be noted. We feel like we're able to do a lot with, what we have. So I just want to call that out and sort of, make note of it.
So we'll switch gears here from talking about expenses to talking about revenues. And these revenues are based on the governor's budget. Historically, the education funding in the governor's budget is the lowest of the 3 budgets that come out of the state. So we are hoping that we will see more revenue. For example, a couple years ago, that $30 per student went to $100 per student for minimum aid districts. So we're hopeful that we'll get something. The transportation reimbursement, there's been a lot of chatter on the business manager listserv about that because Jay Sullivan came out and he said, that's 80% reimbursement, 80%. No, it's 80% reimbursement on 2022 expenses. because not all the districts have their end of year report in for FY23 expenses. So he used it on FY22 expenses, which some districts say, hey, that's more like a 70% reimbursement rate, because it doesn't take into consideration anybody's increase in contracts or anything like that, and it's 2 years ago data. So we're hoping to see more in Chapter 71 transportation region reimbursement as well. Notes on the governor's budget for FY25. I didn't know what fair share spending was or fair share funding, so I provided you the definition. It says that the governor used $1 million of fair share funding to balance the state's budget, and that is the 4% surtax on incomes over $1 million. However, everything that has come out from our liaison at Mars says that revenues are trending lower and significantly lower than projections, so I'm not sure how this is going to stand up either. The Student Opportunity Act will be in its 4th year in FY25 with $230 million increase to Chapter 78. But my chart shows you that 10 districts are receiving 58% of that new money. 10 cities are getting that new money. 255 districts out of 323, which include non-operating districts. If you don't know what that is, ask me and I'll tell you. 68.4% of districts are now in hold harmless debt. So they're getting no increase in Chapter 78 other than the $30 per student. Quabbin fell further into hold harmless debt by $13,000 due to the decline of the 27 resident students. We are now 41st largest district in hold harmless debt at $2,073,207. At one point, we were 3rd highest, so I guess we've come pretty far. 66.4% of all operating districts are receiving the $30 per foundation enrollment FTE. And again, there's where all the money's going for next school year. I provide for you the official cherry sheet, but I'd like to go further. We'll actually do the comparisons. Again, we're getting $30 per student. Our charter tuition reimbursement is up, but that's only because our charter tuition going out is up. The regional school transportation is $145,000 less than we're expected to get this year. Really hoping that we're going to see an increase in either the House or Senate budget on that. And I also provide for you what our charges are. School special education, those are students that are in hospital placements, and we have to pay a portion of that. Then our school choice sending tuition, which is going up slightly, and our charter school tuition, which is going up slightly. I provide for you a look at state aid and the use of E&D on a 10-year look back. I have 21 years of data if anybody wants it, but there's 10 years. In the first 3 columns, you see the fiscal year, the amount of Chapter 70, and the percent increase or decrease. That's dismal. When 50% of your revenue comes from the state, and those are the increases that you're getting every year, we're not going anywhere very fast. We typically get around $57,000, $58,000 of Chapter 70 increase for the last so many years. It doesn't get us anywhere. I have the next column, which is all state aid, which includes Chapter 70, regional school transportation, charter reimbursement, MSBA, because we had that way back when in the first few years, and McKinney-Vento transportation, which is a hit or miss if you get any reimbursement on transporting homeless students. Well, I have the end of year budget there, so you can see how our increases or decrease actually in 1 year, our increase in budget align with the increase of Chapter 78, and what percentage of the state aid fulfills our budget. And that's where the really hard fact is. In FY15, 54% of our aid came from the state, but for next year, only 45.4% is coming from the state. And unfortunately, that means the state is pushing the responsibility to member towns. And the use of E&D as a source for our operating budget is listed as well. We expect to use, at this point, $750,000, or relatively half of what we have in E&D at this point. I also provide some data on our Chapter 70 funding history. This goes back to FY02. But again, Chapter 78 had been the primary revenue source for the funded district's operating budget, but now town assessments are the primary source. To the left, you can see how state aid has continually decreased as a percentage of the total funding of the budget. And on the right, you can see that the district has received minimal increases in state aid since FY09. Unless and until our district climbs out of hold harmless debt by seeing an increase in resident enrollment or increases in low-income students or English learner students, which is the two components of the SOA Act that see the most funding going towards, we will not benefit from what the Student Opportunity Act has to offer us, and that's providing currently for other schools. I have provided for everyone what the reports are from the state and where the numbers come from. So I think it's important that if you look at our projected revenue sources, you know where they come from. The Department of Revenue calculates target share and Chapter 78, and DOE just passes it along to us. But these numbers come from the town. There's no way that I know a number on here because it doesn't come from any of our reports. But these are the reports we use to calculate town assessments. This year is a little different than it has been for the last 5 years, in that all of our towns are under the target share in their required local contribution. Usually there's one town or two towns that are over their requirement or at their requirement. This year, all 5 towns are below their target share as calculated by the Department of Revenue. So I just highlight that on these reports. So here's Barry. So on line 11, it's what target local share is for the town of Barry for FY25 at 40, oh my God, I'm too blind. 43.07, I'm told. Well, now I've screwed up my whole screen, so I don't know where it went. I apologize. Okay. In line 21, it shows that they are on a shortfall for that. And so they've made had an added increment. They've added money to what the formula calculates out that Barry can be paying, and they add an increment charge to that. So they will be paying, why am I going crazy here? The contribution will be at 38% when the state says they should be paying 43%. The next slide just shows how the total amount of money that Barry should be paying towards education is divided between all of the districts they belong to. In this case, Barry belongs to Quabbin and Monty Tech. And I provide that from all the 3 towns. I don't think anybody wants to hear me go through all 5 towns. But now you know what I'm pointing out. So the increases in required local contribution are shown here from those sheets above. That's the base of the assessment of a regional school district. And you can see that there were significant increases in some of our towns for that required based on that target share percentage. And Hubbardston is seeing the largest increase at 7.52%. Hardwick and New Braintree, 1.7, Barry, 3.5, Oakham, 3.8, and Hubbardston almost doubled that. The other part of the regional agreement formula for assessments is resident enrollment. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, 4 of our 5 towns saw a reduction in enrollment for residents in our schools, but Hubbardston saw an increase of 20 students. So when you have the largest increase in required local contribution and the largest increase in enrollment, which town is going to see the largest increase in assessment? The town of Hubbardston, which Mr. Wigler mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. I added these slides from years back so that people understand how the assessments are calculated. The Education Reform Act of 1993, which is just before I came into education, passed a law which included how regional schools could assess their member towns, either by a statutory method, which is written right into the law, or by a regional agreement method. The statutory method says that those required local contributions in each town is the base of your assessment. And any amount over that is divided by the resident enrollment. Those two parts of the formula, 2 variables that I talked about. A regional agreement formula says throw that statutory method out the books And we've all agreed that this is how we're going to do it. So your regional agreement can dictate how you will share the costs of the school district's budget. The only thing is, to use a regional agreement method, it must be voted by a majority vote at an annual or special town meeting every year. So each year, you have to, at the annual town meeting for this year, there would be a vote to use that formula for the next year's budget. All the towns must approve it, and then the Commission of Education has to approve it. So there's some steps that have to go through if you decide to do that. Bobbin uses the statutory method, which are those two variables. I just mentioned that again here. It is important to understand that one member community will not be able to identify how their assessment is going to change by strictly looking at their numbers, because the communities share in the cost of the budget. And I did a little task last time at our meeting, and I said, even if our budget remained the exact same dollar amount, assessments are still going to change. And guess what? Hubbardston's increase would be the highest. Because if you have a pie that's $100, only $100, that's a bunch of $100. And every town saw a reduction in their enrollment, and Hubbardston saw an increase of 20 kids, they don't have to only pay for their 20 kids. They have to make up the difference from every of the other towns that lost enrollment. And that's what sharing does. So you can't look at only their numbers, your numbers, you have to look at all of the numbers in a regional school district. I provide a history of the budget and assessment increases, and Dr. Muir and I tried to do this a year or two ago where we had line graphs, which were very difficult to read, but there really isn't a correlation between what our budget increases and what the member town assessments will do in that year, because it depends on the town's finances and that calculation of required local contribution and the number of resident students on October 1st. And that changes. So you can see in FY15, our budget increase was 2.3. But you see how it was across our towns? It was 3% increase for Barry, 2 for Hardwick, 5 for Hubbardston, a reduction in New Braintree, and Oakham was the highest at 6%. But on average, it was a 3% increase. For the current year, our budget was up 2%, FY24, 6%. 5.5 for Barry, 2.6 for Hardwick, 7.3 for Hubbardston, 2.3 for New Braintree, 7.7 for Oakham, or an average of 5.6. Actually lower than the 6%. How could that be? That was because the year before, the school committee did not use any of the E&D to fund the budget, and for FY24 used $750,000. That's how that 5.6 is lower than our budget increase. This is where the revenue projections stand with our proposed budget number 3 that was voted tonight. At this point, state aid is down. And at this point, district reserves are level. The member town assessments, as Mr. Wiggler started off the meeting, are calculate higher than desired given our 4% increase in our budget. However, it wasn't expected given that the total state aid increase from the governor's budget was only 0.5%. And required local contribution increased by 4.47% for our member towns. Long-term debt assessments were already sent to the towns a while back. Long-term debt on the middle high school green repair project concludes on March 15th of 2027. That's some good news. The towns of Barry, Hardwick, and Hubbardston chose to borrow for the HVAC repair project of last year. That debt is a 5-year renewable ban, which means it's bid out every year for the interest rate on the anniversary date, November 27th, and will be paid off on 11/27/28. Just information for you. What are the next steps in Commonwealth's budget process? Because our budget process depends on theirs. Right now, we're only at step 1. The House Ways and Means budget is due to come out in April, and then we'll hopefully get passed by the House. Whenever there's a dollar sign, that means it could be additional money for us in state aid. Then the Senate Ways and Means budget gets together. They get together and decide on their budget. Goes to the Senate to be voted on. If the major components of the House and the Senate budget do not match, so if Chapter 70 is not the same number in both budgets, which I hope they're not, I hope they go up and they go up even more. Then they go to conference committee and they battle it out. One time they went to conference committee and it didn't come out of conference committee until November. Who was here? Mark, were you here? Were you here? In November. Then it goes for there's vetoes, there's overrides, and then finally the budget, which hopefully will be done by the end of June, but for the last several years hasn't been done until July. Our next steps, as we go through the state's budget process, we're going to review and prioritize our goals and programs. We'll look to reallocate resources. There may be a need to cut programming and staffing further than we already have. And we will advocate for more local and state federal aid. Comments, questions? 124 slides in an hour.
Any school committee questions at this moment? Anyone online or anyone here?
No one's raising their hand online or anything in the chat.
So you mentioned any comments, questions, or concerns can also be mailed to the budget at QRSD.org.
Well, they can be emailed. It'd be hard to mail it to there.
It can be mailed.
Email.
They're now, on my screen, it's now emailed. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I looked at this thing 1,000 times.
I just read it.
1,000 times. I started this project on December 27th. I've seen it a million times and I overlooked that. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I read it without process, so I was like, oh. But, so people can comment as well. Anything else, Mark? First of all, thank you, Cheryl, not only for a thorough presentation that you do every year. You outline the process that's involved on the Chapter 70, and you also highlight the realities of the Commonwealth with hold harmless, as well as the Student Opportunity Act. And we want all school districts to benefit. But when you outline and show 58%, and I get it, the larger cities having a lot more students and issues and complications for the monies. But it is a very clear thing about rural schools, small districts having difficulties as well. So Cheryl, thank you again for the clarity and the steps that are going to happen next. As we do every year, we do have to have a presentation. We have had, Mr. Wiggler, you've had 3 meetings, you've put in the thought, the process, and the analysis. And we want to keep as much program as kids. At the same time, we are realistic with what our towns can afford as well. Adjustments hopefully will be made when we get further monies from the process. Am I correct?
Yes.
We're also paying attention to, our current reality. So our numbers change. I know I was over at Hardwick Elementary today and the office manager was sharing that they were losing students as we speak. So, we are paying attention to our own numbers and thinking about different things that are happening as we go through. It's been really eye-opening for me, to be honest with you, right? It's our first time doing this, but we're planning for a September opening and it's only March, and those numbers, our student enrollment numbers can change dramatically. We can have a family move in. I tried to highlight this at our last meeting, but say we have a family move into district and they have students that are involved in different things. But if we have an out-of-district placement that was unexpected and now we're paying transportation on top of that, the impact of one family moving into our schools can be significant on the district. And towns necessarily don't get any more taxes no matter how many people are living in that home, right? So it's just something that is eye-opening, but also, I hope you see that we've taken a realistic approach. We understand our current reality, but also we feel that it would not be wise to make additional cuts at this time, just because of all the unknowns. We really have to wait it out and see what happens. Just a little bit more.
So, Mark?
Any other questions? I want to thank Cheryl for a fantastic job.
Thank you.
It's almost scary because we'll be talking to Cheryl next year. So hopefully we'll get something that's comparable to this. A lot of challenges going into this. As we speak to people in the community, you know, I speak to folks in Hubbardston, obviously, but in different parts of the district. You know, this isn't, we're providing a lot more services. The system has done it, obviously. And since a lot of our taxpayers went to school, it's a totally different ballgame. Folks really have to realize that. As I look at, I know the need for occupational therapists, I know the need for physical therapists, but are you even gonna be able to hire them? I mean, that's a real issue.
It has been.
And their salaries are significant, but, you know, the need is there. We see the need for a lot of these programs have sort of evolved over the course and become exacerbated after the pandemic. Parents themselves, I mean, special ed numbers have gone up. From 23 to 25% over the course of the last couple of years. Things have really evolved and present a more challenging budget than ever before. And as we look forward, we see the numbers rise. We see the numbers in all the towns going down except for Hubbardston. But I'd like to remind folks that we sat here in the same room like 8-10 years ago and looked at numbers and everybody was going down. I mean, everybody was going down from then to 2030. So we have to be prepared to, roll with the changes that come about. And I'm not so sure that, all that building and all those numbers are actually going to be as they state they are. But we just have to keep keep an open mind. Anybody else have any comments? Happy to entertain them. You've got the address, the email address, if you do have comments, do you have anything on?
No, we're concluding we'll adjourn the public hearing, public budget hearing. All in favor? Aye. And
We have a motion and a second?
yes.
Thank you.
Second?
Sure, why not?
And you want to do roll call?
Sure.
Do it complete, since I have people online?
You have to give me a second because I just closed it out. Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Mr. Deschamps?
Yes.
Mr. Willannon?
Yes.
Ms. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Cartier?
Yes.
Ms. Chamberlain?
Yes.
Ms. Muck?
Yes.
Mr. Wiggler?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Nutter?
Yes.
Chairman Brophy?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.